Shalom and welcome to another edition of Parsha Talk. I'm Rabbi Elliot Malamed in Highland Park, New Jersey, the Highland Park Conservative Temple Congregation on Shemed. Joining me, my good friends, Rabbi Barry Chesler, Solomon Day School of Long Island, Rabbi Jeremy Kalmanovsky, Anshe Chesed, New York City. We're recording this on day 293, thinking of the horrendous ordeal, the anguish of the hostages and their families. We pray that a deal will be reached soon. We pray that they are able to go home, those who are alive. Having just returned from Israel just yesterday, still jet lagged for me. And I said this last week, everything seems to be ordinary, but nothing is ordinary. And it's a very, very difficult time. It's a difficult time as people are trying to really go about their lives in this set of complexities. We are thinking about them and always trying to study the Torah in light of both the information it gives us and a way of shaping our thinking on the world, perhaps, and also giving us a tremendous amount of comfort and inspiration. Hard to think about it, though, with this Parasha Pinchas, which starts with this individual, Pinchas ben Elazar ben Aharon HaKohen, who we met last week, who performs an act of zeal. B'kano et kinati, he acts zealously for God. It says, Pinchas ben Elazar ben Aharon HaKohen, heshiv et chamati, turns my anger away. Me'al b'nei Israel. These are all very difficult ideas, difficult concept, the concept of zeal. We've dipped into that in the past. Here he is, Lachen emor hineni noten lo et briti shalom. I give him the covenant of peace, or the, how does Robert Alter translate it here? He says, I give him the covenant of peace, or many understand it as my covenant of friendship. So the question really is, how this character really evolves and what is the place of zeal, and maybe a little bit about God, that God gets angry, and that the anger of God is set aside by this act. These are very, very complicated ideas. I don't know if anyone wants to address them. Go ahead, Barry. You seem to be ready.
So this is where Rambam is always helpful, who understands everything as metaphor. But what I would start with is this curious phrase, "B'kano et kinati."
Yeah.
In his kano, he did something, God speaking to my kina. And the question is, what did he do? Did he offset God's zeal, God's jealousy? Did he match it? Did he supplant it? Was he so over the top that God said, wait a minute, I have to stop? Because in the next line, he says, V'chiliti et b'nei Yisrael b'kinati. I stopped my kina because of Pinchas. And it leads one to ask, what did Pinchas do that caught God's attention? Was it the matter of the execution? Was it that he acted at all? And the text is very quiet on all these questions.
Maybe it leaves us with these questions. I mean, I think, we can have a very pointed set of challenges about the way that people use violence in the Torah. We have tremendous difficulty with it. But the first violent act of the Torah, and let me just try and make the parallel here. The first violent act is Cain and Abel. And in a close reading of that text, the act, it's God paid attention to Abel's offering, but he did not pay attention to Cain's offering. And Cain, speaks, or he says to Abel, come, and they go out into the field, and Cain kills Abel. And in doing so, he is saying, you want something that you can pay attention to? Here, I'll give you something to pay attention to. Here's my act of violence. Here's my act of ultimate violence. And that
So if you're going to go in that direction, Elliot,
Yes.
So is the mark of Cain equivalent to the Brit Shalom?
No.
Right. And the mark of Cain is often misunderstood. It's not something that's put on Cain so people will recognize what a bad person he is. It's a protective device. It's
Yes.
something that's supposed to shield him from people that might commit bodily harm against him.
So
So
it might be worth, let me say, it might be worth to make the comparison between, as we started here, we didn't plan on this, but it might be worth it to make the comparison between the two characters. One, Pinchas, acts with zeal; the other one acts with pure emotion, or a sense of I want attention. Um, and one gets a mark which protects him; the other one gets a covenant which I'll say, and we can debate this or try and understand it. The covenant of friendship or the covenant of peace is a way of containing him, sequestering him, putting him in a box, basically, and saying this zeal is too powerful for public, for it to parade around in public. You need to be
so
confined.
so that leads us to a couple of observations, perhaps. The first one is rather than understand notain lo as I give him a covenant of peace, sometimes notain is a force of equivalent to lasim, to place upon, that he placed upon him the covenant of peace, in this way restricting him in some way. And then that leads to the parallel that we have between Briti Shalom, my covenant of peace, God's covenant of peace, and Brit Kahunat Olam, that Pinchas was acting perhaps as a freelancer when he commits his judicial execution, but he's destined to become the high priest. And perhaps the covenant of peace is to prevent Pinchas from ever freelancing again. That
Yeah.
now he is going to be bound by a strict set of rules that he has to attend to. And we were talking before about the priesthood, and one of the things that we sometimes emphasize is how the high priest must be totally dedicated to life. He's not allowed to mourn for his own close relatives. The only contact with the dead that he is permitted is with the mitzvah mate, the person who's found dead in the field, that he has to attend to his burial. But other than that, he's completely divorced from death. And in so placing Pinchas in this covenant, he removes him from ever killing again because it would violate his priestliness.
Mhm.
I want to throw one more thing into the mix about the mark of Cain, which I think is quite interesting, which I never thought of before. So Rabbeinu Bachya, who was a student of the Ramban, he lived in Spain in the 1270s, 80s, 90s, and his commentary closely tracks the Ramban. He repeats a lot of the points, and one of the things that's common to him in the Ramban, although more developed in Bachya, is he's the first person who gives us this fourfold. I'm not sure if he uses the word pardes, but he gives you the simple semantic meaning, the sort of rabbinic exposition, philosophical allegory, and Kabbalistic secret. And he says that one of the meanings of Natan Briti Shalom is that Shalom means Shelo Yamut, that he won't die, which means both on the Pshat level, that the Shimonite family of Zimri is not going to take vengeance because they might, maybe there'll be a revenge killing there from Zimri ben Salu's family. Don't worry, I'll give you my, Hine Noten Briti Shalom. But also, he points out, which I also didn't know until I looked it up, that Pinchas ben Elazar is said to be alive at the end of the book of Judges.
Yeah.
So that would mean he was still the Kohen Gadol at the end of the book of Judges. Let me pull this out. There's a civil war that goes on between the Binyaminites and everybody else. Ufinchas ben Elazar ben Aharon omed lefanav bayamim hahem. Pinchas, son of Elazar, son of Aaron Cohen, was still the high priest, and that's got to be, in biblical hundreds of years. It's back to those times before Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, when they lived 175 or 180 years. He lives 300 years or more. So maybe there is, in the minds of the recipient generations of the Tanakh, which some of us know those stories at the end of the book of Judges, and some of us don't. I didn't know that Pinchas lived for 300 years or more. So
The
I think
question really is whether Pinchas knew it.
you know, at a certain point, he was just his age got up to him, and he wasn't really qualified to stand for another 4 years, and then he had to step aside for a younger person. But I think the recipient audience of the Bible, when they hear that phrase, "Hineni noten lo et briti shalom," I give him my covenant of well-being or peace or friendship or whatever, maybe they do know that he's going to live 300 years, and this is a nice little detail in Numbers, which explains what they already know from the story at the end of Judges.
Well, go ahead, Barry.
Gives more force to the rabbinic identification, Pinchas and Eliyahu.
Yeah, I was going to mention
Pinchas
that.
is Elijah, who is one of the two people in the Bible who does
never
not die.
Yeah.
He's also mentioned at a brit. You know, the Moel starts out with Pinchas ben Elazar ben Aaron Yeshiv Mechamati. You know, and this kind of it's not kind of, it directly says that the Brit Milah is an act of zeal in some ways. I always get that feeling whenever I'm attending a bris that invoking Pinchas ben Elazar and Eliyahu Navi calls to mind that what we're doing is an extraordinary act. It has all of the connections to mystery in the past and covenant and blood and all of that, which is very, very deep. But it also requires a certain kind of zeal in order to do that. You have to be a certain kind of makeup to perform a circumcision, and that is it's incumbent upon every Jewish family to do that for their male Jewish child.
It's also an act of violence.
Indeed.
And yet we think of it in terms of peace, or more properly in terms of completion. That this is what completes the baby boy is the brit, or the milah, actually, the circumcision.
Yeah, and it's joyful. We've completely, what is it? We've done this creative betrayal of the whole notion of violence.
And this is the eternal covenant.
Yeah, the eternal covenant.
Right? The Brit Kunat Olam. So
I mean, it is so important. It is so integral to Judaism. It has been, in the 25 years that I've worked in the shul, almost 24 years, it's something that people don't. People relate to it like they have to. They just must. And we're only seeing a little bit nowadays, a generation that maybe is a little less foursquare with Brit Milah, which I find to be a complete Jewish tragedy. This is absolutely indispensable. But if you were starting from your, if you were starting from, making a new religion, a symbolic scar of a baby is like, why would you do that? You don't do that. And exactly as you said, we treat it as a 100% joyful thing, even though if we stop to think about it, it's a little hard. And I certainly have seen lots of moms get, emotional and not find it a completely joyful thing.
So it's interesting that in the mid-19th century, some of the early German reformers got rid of the Brit Milah, no longer holding it necessary. And it helps us, I think, draw the distinction between the religious component of Judaism and the national component. Because the Brit Milah, I think, ultimately is intimately related with the national component of Judaism. And it's not, if you're talking strictly about a religion, maybe you do away with it, as the early reformers did. But as part of our national identity, I think it's fundamental.
I completely agree with you. Spinoza, who obviously had no love of Judaism, said if the Jewish, but this is now in the 16th century or 17th century in Holland, said if the Jewish people are going to come back, it's because of the indelible commitment to circumcision. It's going to always hold them together, and nothing is more tribal than inscribing the sex organs of a little baby. It is totally tribal, and because the former Pharisee Shaul ish Tarshish, Paul of Tarsus, was such a polemicizer against, the circumcision of the body is not the important one. The umaltamet or latlevavchem, circumcise your heart, that's the important thing. The fake Israel cares about the body. The true Israel, that is to say the Christian church, cares about the spirit. If he hadn't gone on that polemic, I don't know if we would feel quite so connected to Brit Milah as we properly do.
Well, look, it conveys to us the seriousness of the religion. It conveys to us things that we can't even express. They're very, very deep, and they're
Flesh and blood.
Yeah,
Flesh and blood.
exactly.
Right.
This is
So
not
what strikes me, though,
only
is
ideas.
that I think almost everyone who has witnessed a circumcision sees it as a rite of initiation. But there's sometimes a fine line between initiation rituals and hazing. And hazing is a kind of initiation that goes too far. But so far, I think most Jews, even today, still regard it as an initiation rather than as a hazing ritual.
Well, because we do it to an 8-day-old baby. And because, at least in the United States, I don't know the European Jews ever felt this way, certainly not probably, 19th or early 20th century Jews ever felt this way. It's akin to a medical procedure, right? So it's healthy, it's good, it's appropriate, blah, blah, blah. But we have it as something that happens to an infant, which desexualizes the thing. But if you were part of a Islamic community that circumcises the adolescent 13-year-old, then yeah, it for sure is just like with Abraham. You can't be ready to procreate unless we befit your equipment. I'm sure that hazing part and both the initiation part and the hazing part are no doubt much more right in your face.
Well, let me use the infant motif here to segue to the haftara.
Yeah.
Now, of course, the Parsha deals with so many other things, including the designation of a successor to Moses. These are themes that we've talked about in the past, and we can, of course, suggest people could, consult our YouTubes of the past or past recordings. But we really have not talked about Jeremiah chapter 1. Now, this year, of course, because of the calendar, this Haftarah is read on Parashat Pinchas, as opposed to Parshat Matot when it's done that way. We are now, after yesterday, which was Shiva Asar B'Tammuz, the seventh day of Tammuz, we're now officially in the 3 weeks, between the 17th of Tammuz and the 9th of Av, weeks that are traditionally known as preparatory weeks or weeks of warning, weeks of difficulty, Bein HaMitzarim, I guess it would be, or the difficult weeks. And the tradition serves up for us haftarot of warning, including the remarkable chapter 1 of Jeremiah, in which I'm going to turn to our resident Jeremiah. Could you just quote for us the line about being formed before you were formed? Rabbi Jeremy Kalmanowski quoting Jeremiah.
So this is the beginning. This is the first chapter. So these are the words of Jeremiah, the son of Hilkiah, one of the priests at Anatot. And the Lord comes to him in the days of the king Yoshiyahu ben Ammon, Melech Yehuda, the king of Judah, B'shlosh Esrei Shana L'Malcho, in the 13th year of his reign, and throughout also King Yehoiakim and his son, and Tzidkiyahu, his grandson. And so verse 5, the Lord comes to me, Beterem et saracha babeten yidaticha, uveterem tetze merechem hiktashticha, navi legoyim netaticha. Before I created you in the womb, I singled you out. Before we talk about what the proper translation is here. Beterem et sarcha, before I formed you, or perhaps before I created you in the womb, I knew you and selected you. Beterem tetze merechem hiktashticha, before you emerged from the womb, I consecrated you. Navi legoyim netaticha, to make you the prophet addressing the nations. So
Yeah.
you want to talk about the verb there, or
I want to talk about
destiny?
this idea of I mean, it's such a striking metaphor, a striking you know, poetic image. And let's talk about the prophet as being selected and chosen, and consecrated, and then the reluctant prophet that emerges from this.
So maybe I'll go on just a little bit then with Jeremiah's response, because Jeremiah is, Jeremiah is all the prophets to one degree, or not all of them actually, but many of the prophets. This is part of the motif. We see it at Moshe Rabbeinu at the burning bush. No, 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 I can't do it. I don't want to do it. And Jeremiah is the most intense version of the prophetic resistance. You know, you seduced me and I was seduced, he yells at God. And it's a fire in my bones, and I can't, I want to shut up, and I will not speak your word anymore. But the fire in my bones becomes too strong and overwhelms me, and I just have to speak. In this first chapter, his prophetic reluctance is expressed in the sweetest way. Vayomer aha Adonai Elohim, and I said, oh no, Lord God, Kine lo yadati daber, I don't really know how to speak. Ki na'ar anochi, for I'm just a kid. Vayomer Adonai Elai, and God says to me, Al tomar na'ar anochi. Don't say I'm just a kid. Ki al kol asher eshlachecha telech, v'kol asher atzavecha tidaber. Don't say I'm just a kid. Wherever, but you're going to go wherever I send you, and you're going to speak whatever I command you. Al tira mipnehem. Don't be afraid of those guys. Ki itecha ani lahatzilecha neum Adonai, because I'm with you to rescue you from all your enemies, says the Lord. I just love that moment of Jeremiah, who does not lack for self-confidence generally. He's as brave as can be, and he's fearless, and he's totally sure of himself. But here at the beginning of his journey, he said, I'm just a kid. And I think everybody can relate to that feeling, I'm just a kid.
Well,
so I think what's
then God
important
says,
to
you're not a
recognize
kid.
is what this phrase comes here to teach us. And that is, God says, in the womb, even before the womb, I designated you a prophet. And Jeremiah is saying, but I'm not in the womb, and it's not before I was born. I'm a Na'ar. This is who I am. This is how I know myself, not the way that you know me. And I think that it's maybe crisis is the wrong word, but it's a problem of identity, because clearly, I think, God sees Jeremiah in a way very differently than Jeremiah sees himself. And who gets to determine his identity, God or Jeremiah?
I would add to that, it's a remarkable statement of self-awareness to say, I'm just a boy, I can't do this. Another kid might have.
The last line is, I am just a boy, my story is seldom told.
Yeah, right. Okay. No, I thank you.
What is that?
It's Simon and
The
Garfunkel.
Oh, the
boxer.
boxer. Right.
Okay. No, but it's another kid would react differently to that, which is, go home and report to his mom and dad, you'll never guess what happened today. God spoke to me and said, before I knew you before you were formed in the womb. Look at me, look how great I am, look how wonderful I am, and it wouldn't. I know kids like that. I know kids who would have been just delighted to go home and say,
Yeah, you know who
I
one
don't
was?
think you go home and tell your parents that God said he knew me before you conceived me.
But
It's not going to bring any joy or cheer to your parents.
who knows? You may make them feel, terrific. Go ahead. Who knows?
We have characters, by the way, like that in the Bible. Yosef ben Yaakov.
Absolutely.
Yosef is the guy who says, I had this dream that all of you bowed down to me.
Well, he's also described as a Na'ar.
Nice.
And
Well, also.
And I think there's perhaps a little bit of a King David shows a little bit of modesty, but he's the guy who, as a kid, goes off to fight Goliath, he also thinks, and Jeremiah is pretty bold throughout his book. But in this moment, Barry, I like the way you posed it about the difference between God's knowledge of Jeremiah and his own self-conception. I don't think that this passage comes to ratify Jeremiah's self-conception, but to overturn it. That is to say, you might look in the mirror and see, I'm just a regular person. I'm a kid. I'm not really mighty. I'm not up to the task. This is what Moshe says at the burning bush. I'm really not up to this task. But Hashem knows that you are up to the task. And there's a way in which I think on the spiritual vibe of the passage is that that God sees things in ourselves that we're maybe not aware of, and God brings them out. In the passage here about, before you were formed in the womb, before we started recording, we were talking about, well, what does that even mean? You don't exist. How can God know you before you exist? I was just glancing at some of the commentators, and the Radak, a medieval Provence, he's from southern France, commentator, says, God knew me in potential, like that phrase, the potential and actual energy. God knew me in potential, and then having brought me forth, knows me in actual. And I thought that was a very inventive way of, bringing some philosophical categories to this, and the thought that a person may not, when they are still in potential, know what they have in them, but God knows what you could yet become, and wants to, goose Jeremiah out there, make him go do his thing.
I want to pick up on that image of Jeremiah looking in the mirror and what he sees. And what God is telling him is, when you, Jeremiah, look in the mirror, you're not supposed to see yourself, you're supposed to see me. And that really is the prophetic vocation, that it's the person that is going to speak the words of God, not one's own words.
Well, let's pursue that with verse 9 and 10. Jeremy, I'm going to hand it over to you, because this is powerful imagery, and these are powerful words. Read verse 9 and 10 of chapter 1 of Jeremiah.
Vayishlach Adonai et yado, vayaga al pi. So God casts forth his arm, his hand, and touches my mouth.
Yeah.
Vayomer Adonai Elai, and God says to me, Hine natati devarai beficha. I have now placed my words in your mouth. That image of the divine hand literally placing the words in the mouth. Maybe think about when you touch the Torah, perhaps.
Yeah.
You touch the Torah, kiss, and put the words in your mouth.
I never thought about it that way, but that's
Isn't there something similar in Isaiah as well? In the first chapter, which we'll read in a couple of weeks.
No.
He gets the coal.
Oh no, in chapter
in the 6th
6.
chapter.
Yeah.
But also Ezekiel and I think Zechariah are both told to eat a book, and the image comes up to them of a book, and they're supposed to eat the book.
Words are very physical; they're very tangible, and God literally puts words in his mouth. But then,
here are the words: Re'eh hifkadeticha hayom hazeh ala goyim v'ala mamlachot, and I appoint you this day over the nations and over the kingdoms. And here's this great poetic lintosh ve'lintotz ulahavir ulaharos livnot ve'lintoa. I've come here for you to uproot and to pull down and to destroy and to lay waste and to rebuild and to replant.
Yeah.
Like Jeremiah is going to come with a very harsh message, but it's not just to destroy, it's to destroy in such a way as he will be able to replant.
So what's also important here, I think, is that Jeremiah here is cast not as a prophet of Israel or of Judah, but of, so to speak, a prophet of the world, that his message is for everyone and will affect everyone with whom Israel or Judah come into contact, not just the Jews themselves. And that, I think, also is supposed to give him greater strength, because
let me ask this
everyone has to listen to it.
which is a kind of more pastoral question, which is, so he's given a mission here, and we're in these 3 weeks, and we're going to go through these 3 weeks, and then following Tisha B'Av will be in a set of 7 weeks, where the mission is so totally different, which is the mission of comfort, to comfort Israel. Now, it's not going to say to Isaiah, who's the dominant prophet of those weeks, second Isaiah, Re'ev karadi hayom hazeh, to lenachem, lechabek, to, it doesn't say it that way, but it's obvious that he does it. The reason why I'm saying this is because, having just been at the Hartman Institute, and we had a seminar on, preaching this year and what to preach about. And part of the challenge of this year since October the 7th is really understanding that we're in this deep period of crisis and deep period of mourning that is being experienced in the whole Jewish people, and a kind of turmoil that we in the closely aligned with Israel are feeling, and that the message that we have to give is a message of comfort and hope as well, even though there's it's very difficult. It may not be a hopeful time, and yet rabbis are called upon to offer hope and consolation to people and comfort. Here Jeremiah is like, no, not about that. It's I got to tell you the truth. The truth is, difficult. Lintosh,
So
the lintots, uproot and pull down, destroy and overthrow.
I think we have to put into opposition the 3 weeks and the 7 weeks. And the fulcrum is Tisha B'Av, which
Yes.
on one hand is a great day of national destruction, but also, according to rabbinic legend, the birthday of the Messiah. And that is then followed by the 7 weeks, which will culminate in Yom Kippur. So in order for us to have a sense of our own personal redemption, which is the gift of Yom Kippur, we have to locate ourselves in the national story. Because without national redemption, there is no personal redemption. If the nation falls, we all fall with it. It's not that we're going to live through it, so to speak. But at the very end of Yom Kippur, we proclaim L'Shana Haba Yerushalayim. As soon as we have this gift of personal redemption, we rejoin the nation. And that, I think, is the comfort that comes from this period of the Jewish calendar.
We talked about this. No, it wasn't in this group. It was something else.
You have another group?
No. It was actually the shiur that my wife Amy gave it when we were up at camp about the death of Moses scene and the degree to which it is or is not hopeful. Is it really quite negative? Moshe has in some ways sinned, and he's been leading this whole journey, and he just has to look out at the land that he's never going to enter. And are there ways in which it's a real slap at Moses? It's not how I feel about it, but one of the things that I said in that, as we were learning that material, is that the hopeful part is not that Moshe ben Amram himself is going to live, because we're all going to die. The hopeful part is that I am part of a nation that's going to live. And so I really relate to that feeling that even though my own individual life is finite, Hatzibur lo met is a little piece of rabbinics that relates to halacha for sacrifice. If there's a public sacrifice, okay, and every single member, and they don't get around to offering the animal. They've designated the such and such bull to be a chatat for the people, and they don't get around to designating it. And every single person in the community who did the such and such sin is already dead. Do you still offer the sacrifice? The answer is Hatzibur lo met. It didn't belong to any individual whose death would therefore invalidate the sacrifice. It belongs to a collective who doesn't die, even if some of its members die. So I relate to this idea that that at this time, the 3 weeks of rebuke and the 3 weeks of focusing on all the losses and the destruction and the failure, which is a really important part of being a Jew, is because we are part of that collective that we survive individual deaths to go on and live an organic future.
So in that way, there's a doorway to hope, in that it's a different kind of hope, in the sense that you're part of something larger, that despite the hopelessness of what you see around you, there's still what to hope for in hopeless situations, that the community around you and the people that you're part of will live beyond you. And while that may not offer complete consolation to someone who is in a deep state of mourning, it may enable them to step out of that real, cavern of mourning and really see some light being part of something else. Look, these are difficult words and difficult times, and of course they demand, a certain kind of confrontation with reality and a certain kind of eliciting of hope and comfort, and that's what Jeremiah can give us too. He's not always dire. He can give us a lot to think about.
The cities will be empty. The city squares will be empty, and there won't be the sounds of sasan v'simcha chatan v'kala.
Exactly.
And then there will be.
And then there will be. Speaking of things that are joyful, let's just wish Galit a happy birthday.
Happy birthday, Galit.
18.
Thank you.
A big
18th
shout out
birthday.
to Galit, and a big shout out to our friends at Camp Ramah in the Berkshires who are listening to us wherever they're situated, either in their bunks or at the Agam, where we are being played on
For our rapt
speakers
audience.
of our rapt audience, the Dutchess County. And you know what? Having been in Jerusalem just now, I know that there are people who listen to us in Israel, and also I was there with many colleagues, many of whom listen to our Parsha Talk and thank us for giving them things to talk about. So we want to thank you for watching and listening to us, and you're part of our Parsha Talk community, the Parsha Talk community. So with that, we want to thank you and wish you all a beautiful Shabbat, a quiet Shabbat, and we'll
Shabbat
see you
shalom.
next week on the next edition of Parsha Talk. Bye-bye.